All right, yeah, I think people will still continue to leak in here, but looks like we've got a good group. Wanted to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this morning. Really appreciate giving us some time today. It's the first day of summer, so I know it's the first day of the busy summer brewing season. So we really appreciate your time with us, and got a lot of great information here. Ryan and his team have done a really great job. Did a lot of hard work and getting very granular in sustainability on the hop growing side of things in the field. This is kind of a part one of a multi-part series we're going to be doing on sustainable hop production. And again, it's going to be focused on hops in the field today, but do stay tuned. We're going to have a lot more information coming down the road here. We do encourage questions. Please use the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those at the end of Ryan's presentation. With that, I'd like to start with just kind of a brief overview of the hop market in general. There's been a lot of good information that's come out the last several months. Started back in March. We got the USDA hop stocks report. That data isn't up here, but the bottom line was 196 million pounds of hops at dealers and growers and at breweries, and that's a lot of hops. That's a lot of hops. So what we see on the screen here really isn't too surprising. 976 acres come out of the ground for crop 22. Matter of fact, I think what's surprising is that number isn't bigger. I think we kind of expected a few more acres to come out of the ground, given what we see in the hop market today. But and what does that mean for you? You the brewer, and kind of what we want to take away from today is that again, there's a lot of hops out there, and it's a buyer's market. So it really means that you, the brewer, should be having conversations with all of your hop suppliers, and really identifying where the best opportunities are for you, and not letting any one supplier dictate what you should be doing with your hop supply. And then hopefully today, when you come out of this presentation, that you're armed with some information and some questions that you can take on the sustainability side of things, and really asking those important questions about long-term sustainable hops and hop production. So that's kind of what we hope you take away from today. So, Ryan, go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is looking at public and proprietary acreage. Similar story we've seen the last several years. We are definitely a proprietary dominant in the U.S. hop market. We really don't see that, while it's kind of stabilized. Alpha has seemed to have stabilized, as well as public versus proprietary. We don't really see that changing too drastically over the very near term. Next slide, Ryan. And a similar story with aroma and dual purpose hops versus alpha. We're very much an aroma market here in the U.S. And again, we don't see that changing anytime soon. That's been driven by the craft industry and craft innovation. What I will say is kind of something to keep in the back of your mind is that generally, and this isn't true of every variety, but generally, aroma varieties tend to be lower yielding than alpha varieties. So, and that presents certain challenges when you're talking about sustainability, which Ryan will get to later in the presentation. But just something to think about and keep in the back of your mind. It doesn't apply to all varieties. As a matter of fact, you'll see a lot of our aroma varieties are the exceptions to that rule, but it's just something to think about. And then this is the hop production forecast that we've put together for crop 22. For those of you that may not be aware, we've had a very cold and wet spring in the Pacific Northwest this year, which has impacted the development of the hop crop this year. So we do see it coming in a bit lighter than last year, certainly. There's still a long way to go. Mother Nature always has her say, but we do see it coming in about 105 to 110 million pounds roughly this year, based on the information available to us right now. So again, all of this really is just kind of setting the stage that there's a lot of hops out there. I don't know that any variety is immune to the oversupply situation right now. So make sure you're having good conversations with all of your hop suppliers or potential hop suppliers. And hopefully you'll be coming out today armed with some information on asking some good pointed questions on hop varieties and their sustainability and eco-friendliness. Go ahead, Ryan. So this is just a list of our varieties that we've launched the last several years. I'm sure some of you are familiar with these. For those of you that aren't, there's a lot of great, unique, very interesting varieties here. You're going to see them pop up in the research that Ryan's done in very interesting ways. And then, looking towards the future, we've got, our advanced genomic program really starting to hit its stride. We've got some very interesting experimental varieties coming, but what you see here really is just the tip of the iceberg. And all of these have been bred with the sustainability ethos in mind, and everything that Ryan's going to talk about, as it applies to our breeding program going forward, really is state of the art and leading the industry. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan. Ryan Gregory is our research agronomist, and he's going to take you through the meat of the presentation.
Thanks, Doug. Good morning, everyone. I've been with Hopsteiner as a research agronomist for a little bit over 2 years, working closely with our breeding program. And previously, before that, I worked in Texas for 5 years with a commercial cotton breeding program. And today we're going to talk about eco-friendly hops, which we define as hops with a reduced on-farm environmental impact. And the goal of this project was to measure the varying environmental impact associated with different commercial hop varieties, and then provide that data to you as our customers so you can consider environmental impact decisions when you're choosing your different hop products, but also provide the information to our breeding program to guide us as we continue to breed the world's most eco-friendly hops. So whenever we're breeding an eco-friendly hop, what are some characteristics that we're looking for? We're looking for hop varieties with a reduced carbon footprint, which is a total CO2 equivalent emissions associated with the hop production. And as Doug mentioned, today we're just going to focus on the emissions from chemical inputs only, which are fertilizer and pesticide applications. However, Hopsteiner is in the final stages of conducting a full life cycle analysis, which will look at the emissions associated with our entire hop operations. So be on the look of the release of that here shortly. Eco-friendly hops also have decreased pesticide requirements, higher yields resulting in increased land use efficiency, and we're looking for increased nutrient and water use efficiency as well. The data presented today was collected over 4 years of mature crop only from a single farming operation in the Yakima Valley, and that ensures that we have consistent crop management and a fair comparison of all the varieties with the data collected. And we summarize variety yields over these crop years, as well as pesticide and fertilizer records. Some of you might have seen the Hop Growers of America recently released a hop cultivation life cycle analysis, which is just kind of a broad overview of the work we're going to look at and go more in depth today. And what they did is they surveyed growers, and they looked at the total emissions associated with growing alpha hops and aroma hops. But it's important to note that this doesn't look at any specific variety, but rather it's an average of the emissions across all varieties. And there's actually quite a bit of variation within the varieties, which is what we'll look at today. It's no surprise that the majority of the emissions they saw were associated with hop kilning. However, I want to point out they did see that chemical emissions, which we're going to focus on today, was still a significant portion, and nearly 25% of emissions for the aroma hop production. And that brings us, as we take this work and we go in to more depth, much more detail, and we look at the carbon footprint at the variety level. And when I reference carbon footprint, what I'm talking about is the total CO2 equivalent emissions associated with the chemical inputs of the hop cultivation. And these are from the pesticide and fertilizer applications, as well as the fuel consumed to apply those chemicals. And we summarize those total emissions by hop variety and then divided by total hop production. That way we could look at which varieties had more emissions per pound of production. CO2 equivalent emission is a standardized way to compare multiple greenhouse gases emitted from a process. For example, whenever you burn a gallon of diesel, there are multiple greenhouse gases released, but you can compare all of those, the total global warming potential as a CO2 equivalent. And this example here at the bottom shows that methane has 25 times the CO2 equivalent, 25 times global warming potential of carbon dioxide. So application fuel emissions from these chemical inputs vary based off of the application method. And we focused on ground and aerial applications. And the emissions depend on what vehicle you're using and also the speed of application. And you can see aerial applications, they actually consume more fuel per hour, but because they're able to treat so many more acres, they actually have less emissions per treated acre. That being said, the majority of the hop applications are made with tractors via ground application. Pesticide emissions result from the formulation and packaging of the pesticide active ingredients, and they go back to the plants that are producing the pesticides. And that also varies by the pesticide category. And here in this chart, you see the CO2 emissions factors that we utilize for the different pesticide categories. And these came from research done by Audsley et al. At Cranfield University, and it's one of the most widely cited literature references for this type of work. And a general rule of thumb, the more complex the active ingredient is, the more emissions are associated with its production. And you can see that a fungicide has more emissions per pound of active ingredient compared to adjuvants and herbicides, et cetera. And that's because fungicides are usually very specific molecules targeting a very specific pest. And so there's some more energy requirements to produce that specific chemistry. Similarly, fertilizer emissions come from the production of the fertilizer, but they also include post-application emissions with the volatility of nitrous oxide that's associated with specifically nitrogen fertilizers. And this volatility is also a major greenhouse gas component, because nitrous oxide has a very high global warming potential, has 298 CO2 equivalents per pound of nitrous oxide release. And in 2020, the EPA estimated 7% of all United States greenhouse gas emissions were associated with nitrous oxide. Because of this, the amount of emissions per fertilizer really vary based off the source of fertilizer. And we see that here in this chart that shows the varying emissions factors from the different fertilizer sources. And in general, the nitrogen fertilizers have much higher emissions per pound because of that associated nitrous oxide emissions. But across the board, all of the fertilizers have less emissions per pound of nutrient compared to pesticides, but we apply fertilizers at much greater rates per acre. So fertilizers and pesticides actually both become a significant component of the chemical input emissions. So when you summarize all this at the hop production level, how do the different varieties compare? And that's what we're going to look at here as we get into the meat of the presentation. What this is showing is all of the different varieties that we collected data for on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, you see the total amount of CO2 equivalents emitted per pound of leaf hop production. So you want to have the lowest number possible. That means you have less emissions per pound of production, a lower carbon footprint for growing the variety. And what we want to point out is you see the top 10 varieties here, all were released from the Hopsteiner breeding program, and they all vary anywhere from less than 1.5 pounds to less than 2 pounds total of emissions per pound of hop produced. And you can compare that to, some of them go all the way above 5. And today we're really going to compare to Centennial and Cascade, because they're popular classic aroma hops. They also have kind of an average emissions from this this data set here, around 2.5 pounds of emissions per pound of production. We have our breeding program is having a great improvement on carbon footprints compared to these classic hops. And so that brings us to get a little bit more focused on today's most eco-friendly hops that have been released from Hopsteiner's very dedicated breeding program. And we're going to focus a little bit more on these 4 here: Sultana, Lotus, Eureka, and Helios. These, on average, all of these varieties have 40 to 60% less emissions per pound of hops compared to Centennial. They all were released from our dedicated breeding program, and they all possess elite agronomic traits that allow them to achieve these low carbon footprints. And here are some pictures of our great breeding team that I'm very lucky to work with, working hard in the field to get the hops to you guys and develop new varieties. And you see there Nikolai Petra in the bottom left, and in the bottom right, Dr. Catherine Easterling, Lauren Lopes, and Rachel Bussey. If you've listened to any of our webinars in the past, or you've heard us talk about our breeding program, you know one of our major focuses throughout the entirety of our breeding program is breeding for disease defense traits. And that has a major role in how we are able to breed and grow hops with a lower carbon footprint. And so today we're really presenting how big of an environmental impact this is having on hop production. And specifically, these world's most eco-friendly hops are able to have the low carbon footprint because of their disease defense traits. We focus mostly on breeding for powdery mildew and downy mildew because they're major pathogens that impact the hop growing worldwide. And we have been able to utilize our genetic markers as well as greenhouse disease screenings to select for these disease defense traits. Disease tolerance and resistance has an impact on the carbon footprint because it reduces the total amount of fungicides required for the hop cultivation and the total emissions associated with those fungicide applications. There are two types of disease defense traits that we breed for, and those are resistance and tolerance. And I think it's important for everyone to understand the difference of those. The resistance, the disease is typically not observed in the field because the hop varieties are resisting or combating the disease and actively killing it, so the disease infection does not occur. And this is most associated with powdery mildew, where we have specific resistance genes referred to as R genes, where we're able to use our molecular markers to select a specific resistance that we know will prevent a specific isolate of powdery mildew that grows in the Pacific Northwest or in Germany. Tolerance, on the other hand, you still see the infections occur, but they have limited impact on the overall plant health and plant production. So the plant is simply able to tolerate and continue to produce high production, even with the presence of disease. This is a commonly used disease trait for powdery mildew, which is a little bit more challenging for the plants to combat. And the value of our genetic markers in the hop breeding program is we're able to stack multiple forms of resistance, which makes our resistance even more durable and less likely for the pathogens to overcome that in the future. And we've done a lot of work on this in the past. Today, we're not going to get in depth, but if you would like to learn more, please go to our website and look at our previous Hoppy Topics webinar series about our elite molecular marker breeding program.
Yeah, we have two webinars actually that are archived that go into great depth and detail in our breeding program. So take a look at those.
Yes, yeah, please do. And you can see the information here on the bottom of where you can find those on our website. But one thing that's important to note about markers is they just predict the resistance or tolerance based on the genetics, but it's always important to confirm the markers are correct. And we do that by challenging all of our breeding lines and varieties in the greenhouse with powdery mildew and inoculating them. And here you see our team really focusing in and looking for the powdery mildew. This looks like a nice stage photo, but this actually was just a candid shot of us really focusing to make sure that we don't have any disease on our plants. And what we do is we're looking for the actively growing fungus. Here you can see the white cottony growth of powdery mildew on the leaves. And any plants that have growth are susceptible, and we drop those and we don't advance them in our breeding program. In all these four Hopsteiner varieties here, they have some form of powdery mildew and downy mildew resistance or tolerance. And that's what allows them to have such a low carbon footprint per pound of production, because this resistance and tolerance reduces our need to apply fungicides to the field and ultimately a lower carbon footprint. And you can see that because they compared to Centennial, which is susceptible to both powdery and downy mildew, and it has a much higher emissions per pound. This data gives us confidence in our new exciting experimental aroma varieties that you see here. They've just reached the pre-commercial stage, should be available to you guys to brew with in some quantities in the future. We don't have the data to look at their full carbon footprint. However, because we see that they all have strong powdery mildew and downy mildew resistance traits, we're able to have high confidence that they will have a low carbon footprint and low emissions per pound of production. Another key component to our varieties having low carbon footprint is high stable yields. High yields is an improved land efficiency because we don't need as many acres to fulfill the market demands. And a big component of that is yield stability, which is how consistent the yield is from one environment to another. And that can be multiple fields of the variety within the same growing season, or it can be how consistent the yields are from one growing season to another. And yield stability means higher consistency, less volatility of yields, and that less volatility translates to less risk for our growers and our brewers. And we're able to actively breed for these in our breeding program with our unique genetic markers that are able to predict which males will be the best fathers for producing hops with increased yield, increased cone size, increased plant biomass. A great example of this is the graph here showing Sultana versus Centennial, where the bar chart is actually the relative amounts of yield. Centennial has over 180% average yield production versus Centennial, so that's a lot higher land use efficiency, but it also has a much greater yield stability, and that's what you see in those graphics of the size of the cone. The smaller the cone means the less variation in yield, and you see Sultana has a small cone compared to Centennial, which has large fluctuations in yield. In any given season, you can see Centennial yields range from 5 to 10 bales and a variation as much as 30%. And Sultana, we see less than 15% yield fluctuation. So it has really high yield stability, and which ultimately means it's a more sustainable variety. The third component that we focus on is nutrient use efficiency. Nutrient use efficiency is how many pounds of hops you're able to produce per pound of applied fertilizer. And improved nutrient use efficiency means that we can produce more with less. We're able to reduce the amount of fertilizers we apply and still achieve our yield targets. And with the reduction in fertilizer comes a reduction of total CO2 equivalent emissions. And this has a big environmental impact because the International Fertilizer Association estimates that 1.5% of all global emissions are associated with fertilizer production and application. And specifically, some breeding efforts we target at this is breeding for plant resource allocation, something we refer to as the cone to leaf ratio. We want to ensure that the hops are more efficiently converting those nutrients into the harvestable product of cones and not just producing lots of leaf biomass. You can see how the varieties rank in the nutrient use efficiency here. And this graph specifically is looking at nitrogen use efficiency. So the x-axis is the varieties surveyed, and the y-axis is how many pounds of hops are produced per pound of applied nitrogen. So in this case, the higher the value, the higher the nitrogen use efficiency. And you see here again, all of our Hopsteiner varieties are on the left, the highest nitrogen use efficiency on the chart. And that means that our breeding program is having an impact on able to take our fertilizers further into hop production and reduce the total amount of emissions associated with the hop cultivation. Our final major component of eco-friendly breeding is climate resiliency. And that's where we focus on the heat tolerance and water use efficiency. And our goal is to minimize crop impacts from varying climates, such as heat waves and reduce water shortages. And one way we go about this is breeding with wild and neo-mexicanus hops that are collected from arid regions, where we know they have some form of drought tolerance because of their less broad leaf shape allows for them to cool off faster in the sun, reduce total transpiration, and more robust root structures that are able to more quickly access the water available in the soil. And we've been trialing this theory out by doing some irrigation deficit trials where we reduce the total amount of water applied to simulate drought. Last year, I'm sure most of you remember, the Pacific Northwest had a major heat wave referred to as a heat dome throughout the hop growing season across pretty much the entire hop growing area, record temperatures. And this heat wave had a major impact on a lot of our competitor varieties, which you see in the photos here in the top left, a lot of vine and leaf wilting and even total vine death that had significant impacts on yields. And that plays into poor yield stability. However, thankfully, of the Hopsteiner varieties, they handled the heat really well. Here on the right, you see a picture of a lotus yard taken as the exact same time as these competitor hops. During the heat wave, the hops were doing just fine, having none of that wilting or death. And we also, anytime a major climate challenge or a heavy pressure from insects or disease or whatever comes about, us as breeders, we get really excited. We put our boots on, slap our hands together and say, let's go out to the field and take some great notes, see which of our breeding lines performed well and which didn't perform well. We take advantage of any opportunity we can to identify varieties that have any sort of poor performance in any category and make sure we eliminate them and only move forward with the most sustainable and eco-friendly hops. So it's a good chance for us to select for drought and heat tolerance. One way we took this down to the variety level is we looked at lotus irrigation deficit trial, where we reduced the total amount of water applied in sections of the field and compared the performance to the section of the field that received the full water allotment. And this allowed us to simulate how lotus would perform under a drought scenario. And this was conducted during the heat wave. So it was a really great representation of really heavy moisture and heat stress pressure. And in our drought simulation, we actually reduced the total plant available water by 36%. However, we saw lotus maintain high yields and only have a small yield decline of 12%. And we focused on lotus because it has Neo-Mexicanus in its background. And it was a good way for us to test our theory that breeding with these wild hops can bring some drought tolerance. And because the yield decline was so minimal with that heavy water stress, we were able to show that Neo-Mexicanus and other wild hops can bring in strong drought tolerance. This graph here is illustrates the amount of moisture stress that we achieved in this trial. And these graphs and the lines are soil moisture at two different levels. The blue line is 10 inches in the root depth, and the orange line is 20 inches in the root depth. And you want to maintain these moisture levels in the green and blue bars so that you don't accumulate any plant stress. Once the moisture levels drop into the yellow and red section, you start accumulating quite a bit of plant stress. And at the top was the standard irrigation treatment, the full water amount, and you see our farmers did a great job of keeping up with the heat and maintaining adequate levels where we achieved no stress and full yield potential. However, on our drought simulation, you can see we achieved quite a bit of stress and we really pushed lotus to its limits and were able to showcase that it can maintain yields in a drought situation. So what does all this mean for you guys at our brewery? What is the take home for our customers? And to illustrate that, we wanted to show how if you select eco-friendly hops with lower carbon footprints, how that can actually significantly reduce the total emissions associated with your brewery. And to do that, we developed a pale ale recipe where we compared the eco hop pale ale recipe where we utilize Helios and Sultana, two hops with low carbon footprint, versus the traditional pale ale CTZ and Centennial, which are more traditional hop bill and they have a moderate to high carbon footprint. These hops were used for a 60-minute addition to target 20 IBUs and 2 pounds per barrel dry hop. Helios was the 60-minute addition. Sultana was the aroma dry hop for the Eco Hop Pale Ale, and CTZ was the bittering addition for the traditional, and Centennial was the aroma dry hop. And we looked at, with this hop bill, what were the total CO2 equivalent emissions associated with the hop cultivation across a 100-barrel batch. And what we saw was the Eco Hop Pale Ale, which utilized the Hopsteiner varieties Helios and Sultana, actually had 215 pounds of less CO2 equivalent emissions compared to the traditional hop bill with CTZ and Centennial. And this was actually a 41% reduction in total CO2 emissions from the hop bill. And to put that in context, that's the same emissions from a 238-mile car road trip, which is actually driving from the Brooklyn Bridge all the way to the White House if you were lucky enough to not get stuck in traffic. So that's actually quite a significant reduction. And so you can see that if you utilize this data and are brewing with these Hopsteiner hops with lower carbon footprints, you can actually have a significant reduction on your brewery emissions, and they're valuable tools to help you hit your sustainability goals. So in summary, Hopsteiner offers some of today's most eco-friendly hops. Sultana, Lotus, Eureka, Helios, they're a great example of those. They have a reduced carbon footprint associated with the hop cultivation, and that's thanks to our state-of-the-art breeding efforts, which are focused on disease traits, nutrient use efficiency, higher yield stability, and many more things. And the big take home is these hop products can allow brewers to lower their total emissions at the brewery without sacrificing flavor, because we also have bred these to have elite flavor and aromatic characteristics. And that's what Doug is going to talk a little bit more about next. But first, I just want to mention, as we continue moving on in the future, we're going to continue to update and present this CO2 emissions data at the variety level so we can continue to maintain a current set of data for our customers. Hopsteiner is pretty soon going to release the full life cycle analysis for our entire hop operations. And eventually we want to be able to take that life cycle analysis to the variety level, where we can go beyond chemical emissions and look at the total cultivation emissions from plant all the way to bale. And we want to start looking more in depth at irrigation use efficiency and total water requirements for various varieties. And the last thing is start to get an idea of how much carbon can hops sequester, because there is emissions associated with the hop growing process, but there also is quite a bit of sequestration going on too. We know that hops assimilate carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and sequester it into the soil, and that can have a significant reduction on the overall carbon footprint. And the Hop Growers of America is in the beginning stages of that research, and so hopefully in the future we can continue to incorporate more of that. And most of all, we're going to continue to breed the world's most eco-friendly hops. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Doug to talk a little bit about what products are available in these eco-friendly hops.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Good stuff. I mean, you said it very well at the end there. You know, we have these sustainability targets and these breeding goals, but you know, one of them, it really doesn't matter if the hops don't work in the brewery. And what we've found is, you know, we have a vast majority of varieties here that provide a wide array of very interesting and very unique aromas and flavors that allow you the brewer to set your beers apart from the rest of the pack. That's really kind of, you know, the bottom line here, that because all of these generally most of these varieties rank very high on all of these sustainability metrics. So you know, there's a lot of opportunity for you, the brewers, that have that sustainability ethos to look at these new and unique varieties and you know, achieve both interesting, you know, brewing interesting beers and lowering your environmental impact. So go ahead, Ryan. You know, we focused on these four today. They were the four of the highest ranking. So just to kind of, you know, really, you know, put a spotlight on them, you know, they're phenomenal hops from a sustainability standpoint, but they're also phenomenal hops we've seen in the market. Bringing Sultana's got a pineapple bomb, big fruit, one of the highest oil contents on the market. Lotus, with a very unique background, brings a really unique flavor profile. We used to call it the orange Julius, the orange creamsicle. It's got big orange and yellow, but it's got this berry and tropical fruit thing that really sets a beer apart when it has Lotus in there. Eureka's got some of the highest free 3MH content. These are very powerful thiols. Gets a little bit of that dank, and again, another high oil content. And then Helios is our newest variety, super high alpha. The really interesting thing about Helios that we didn't really mention is that Helios is typically harvested around Labor Day, very early picking window, which is a huge advantage, both from a sustainability standpoint, because you don't have to continue to add nutrients and applications in the field for another month, but also because it really opens up that late picking window where we see a lot of the other varieties coming ripening up. So very diverse, and it's just super clean, high alpha variety that we're very excited about.
Doug, if I may mention too, the early pick window of Helios really plays into the yield stability, because the earlier we can get those hops in the bale, the less risk there is for them being exposed to the weather and the insects, like in the diseases like you were referring to. So that really helps increase the yield stability and yield consistency as well.
Yeah. And I'll go ahead and you can go ahead and move on, Ryan. And all of these varieties, including the varieties we showed on the previous slide, they're available across a vast majority of products. Whether it's leaf, pellet, extracts, our new Salvo product, which has become very popular. All of these varieties are available in that application as well. So we are a global hop supplier. We supply hops from all over the world, and we have a vast array of products that these hops are available in. So look forward to hearing from all of you. So I think with that, I say thank you again for listening. If there's any additional questions, there's been a few that have popped up in the chat that we've kind of hit along the way. Please enter them in the Q&A here. I've got a couple in the Q&A right now. A few more popping in here. Why is the acreage of hop cultivation decreasing in other states other than Idaho, Oregon, Washington? Is this because of low sustainability and low yields? Maybe I'll take a first crack at this, Ryan, if you have anything you want to chime in. Typically what we've seen in some of the other hop growing areas of the United States, particularly in Michigan, that's one I'm most familiar with because I'm closest to it out here. I'm in northern Illinois. Is that there is a substantial amount more disease pressure because the Midwest is a bit more humid and gets a lot more rain than the Pacific Northwest, which is a lot more arid. So you do see more of that disease pressure, which can lead to lower yields and more challenges in the field. And some of the varieties that are available are typically they're public varieties for the most part, and they are typically lower yielding varieties. So as the market price for hops has come back the last several years, I think you've seen some challenges for some of the smaller growing operations in those areas. Anything to add, Ryan, on that?
No, I think you summed it up well. One of the reasons the Pacific Northwest works the best, especially Idaho and Washington, is because drier climate, but still the water availability, we're able to really reduce the disease and insect pressure, and that has a big impact on the sustainability and yield stability, and that kind of plays into the other regions across that latitude that are usually a little bit more moist or humid, makes it a little more challenging.
Second question here, were there any shifts in aroma intensity and characteristics observed from the Lotus water drought trial? I'll leave that one for you, Ryan.
Yeah, so we took samples from the different treatments, put them through our aroma panel, and then we also did a full oil fractionation, and we saw no significant differences or deviations. So the intensity was still there and still really strong and true to type of what we observed. So that was a great question and a great benefit also, that we know we can still achieve the top quality in those situations.
Right on. Next question from Alexis here. One, what does Neomex mean? And two, where are your hops grown? What states, countries? So Neomexicanus is a wild hop typically found in the New Mexico area, the more arid southwest region of the United States. And I can let Ryan speak to it, generally as well. But we brought in that that genetic material specifically to look at the drought resistance that you would see from a hop that you found growing in the mountains of the desert, right? Ryan, I don't know anything else you want to talk about Neomex and our use of that in the breeding program?
Yeah, Neomexicanus, like you said, is a wild hop found throughout North America, but we specifically focus on the ones in the southwest region, like Arizona, New Mexico, and collecting the wild hops that are grown in really high elevation arid environments. So they already have a natural drought tolerance. They can survive with low water requirements. And so that helps us breed that in over time so we can keep the nice aroma characteristics that we have in the commercial cultivars, but also bring in that drought tolerance. And then asking about where our hops are grown, what states and countries. We grow primarily in the Pacific Northwest, so Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. And then we also have operations in Germany where there's a breeding program that's our sister program, and they have varieties in that region as well.
Yeah, Alexis, our growing operations are focused in Yakima, Washington. That's where our specific Hopsteiner growing operations are, but we do work with growers around the world. Okay, will the Hopsteiner life cycle analysis tackle water usage as well as CO2 equivalents in production? Ryan, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so that one, it's more similar to the Hop Growers of America survey, where it kind of looks at the broad overview average of the total operations, and it does include even irrigation water used in the field and the hop cultivation, and then also emissions based off of energy sources and kilning, et cetera. And it goes beyond that throughout the total life cycle, just as the name suggests.
Follow up from Alexis specifically. Where are these eco-friendly hops that you mentioned grown? So yeah, those are our proprietary varieties that we grow in Yakima, Washington. So all of our growing operations are in Washington. Again, as Ryan mentioned, though, we do have a breeding program in Germany, and two of the varieties on that longer variety list that we showed, Akoya and Solero, are actually from our German breeding program, and they have a lot of this similar eco-friendly characteristics of powdery downy mildew resistance and high yielding hops. So those are grown in Germany. We don't have our own growing operations in Germany. We work with growers across Europe over there, but we do have some new varieties coming out of that German program as well. Okay, last question here. How do current state mandated quarantines in the Pacific Northwest affect the ability to bring in new genetics for the breeding program, especially since hop is primarily clonally propagated and can carry disease? Ryan, can you speak to that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we talked about collecting wild hops and breeding with them in our breeding program. And but we don't want to bring any hops from outside the Pacific Northwest that may bring pathogens or virus that threaten the hop cultivation. But what doesn't pose a significant risk is hop seeds. So we're able to have ways in our program to make crosses, outside the Pacific Northwest, and then bring the seeds to use for planting in our nurseries and continue the wild integration without actually having to bring new vegetative material and threaten the growing region. So that's a great question, and we have a strong commitment to that so we don't threaten our growing region.
Okay, well, that was the last question we had in the Q&A. Oh, one more. How does your breeding program differ from that of your competitors?
Yeah, I think this presentation is a great example of how we differ from our competitors. So we're going for top quality, but simultaneously, we're also going for reduced environmental impact. And as far as I know, I haven't seen a hop presentation that actually presents real variety level data of the carbon footprint. And so we're not just talking about how we're breeding more environmental friendly hops with high brewing quality. We're actually measuring, improving it, and then sharing that information. And this information is not from just a emissions estimator or a calculator, but it's actually true farm data measuring the true emissions. So I think that really sets us apart, that we're breeding for the environment at the same time while we're breeding for our customers and the brewing industry.
And I think maybe more specifically too, Ryan, our breeding program, and again, we didn't get into it today because it wasn't the main objective of the presentation, but, our breeding program is a molecular marker assisted breeding program that we've been working on for the last, working with the last 25 years. We've really kind of led the industry as far as bringing that genetic work to the fore in hop breeding, which has not been traditionally done in the past. So I don't know, Ryan, if you want to speak in maybe in a little bit more detail on that side of things. But again, we do have 2 other hop webinars on our website that go into very good detail on our breeding program and how it is different from anything you'll find anywhere else.
Yeah, that's a great point. So beyond our approach and is really the tools we have available to allow us to be so successful, and that is our molecular marker programs. We have some of the top geneticists and bioinformaticians and cytogeneticists on our team that have developed a excellent molecular marker breeding program that's more detailed on those webinars like Doug mentioned. But a huge benefit of that is we're actually able to look at male hop genetics and identify which ones will bring the disease resistance we want, the high yield production, high yield stability that we're going for, so we can have more success at developing new and eco-friendly hops. And that's a huge benefit, because male hops, if you've ever seen them, they just produce small flowers with the pollen. They don't produce hop cones. So you can't really measure the yield, but we're able to use our molecular markers, which are cutting edge, the worldwide leading to do that. And that really sets us apart.
Right on. Well, thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate your time. This will be stored and archived if you would like to review again later. But thank you so much for attending, Ryan. Thank you for all your hard work. And we look forward to seeing you all soon over beers. Cheers. Have a great day.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, everyone.